Ich freue mich, hier zu sein, und danke für die Einladung, liebe Corinne Flick.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here. And after so many interesting and lively presentations which we heard, you are still ready and willing to listen to my presentation because I believe it is a very important topic I'm talking about. It is all about our geopolitical order or disorder, rather, after the Russian war. War returning to Europe has held us spellbound for quite some time now. Russia is conducting a classical large power war, and this hasn't happened since 1945. This means every one of us now understands that after 1989, the European order has now been completely destroyed by Putin. It will not be possible to remedy this. But Russia's war also, opens, say, the perspective, showing things from other perspectives. China becoming a very, say, dominating power, Europe's problems and its economic vulnerability, the crisis of democracy in the United States, the danger of America, turning away from Europe, and of course the distortions which you will see in the countries of the South. The old order is over, but a new order hasn't established itself yet. So we live in a kind of disorderly intermediate phase, a dangerous phase, a multipolar world where the great powers are struggling to get dominance. And some contours of the new geopolitical power situation might just be visible. And over the next 20 minutes, I would like to trace them, identify them in a kind of tour de force. Say, I'm going to make broad strokes, looking at the power blocks and the relationships of these blocks with each other. Let us start with Russia. Attacking Ukraine, invading Ukraine, Putin violated the principles of the European peace order. He did not only disregarded them, but he also turned them upside down. Russia is turned into a revisionist power. This power wants to have special rights when it comes to its geography. It wants to have parts of Europe tied to itself, builds on partnerships with authoritative regimes, and wants to split the world into influencing zones of great powers. The aspiration, the claim of Russia to power, based on a crude, great Russian philosophy, historical philosophy, is something which Putin promotes. And this is a neo-colonial project. There were predecessors, the Crimea annexation, but today's war now is different. It shows itself in its strategic radicality. The economic and political costs for the Ukraine obviously have not played a role in Putin taking this or that decision. It is all about the power he wants to get. The economic loss might be bearable for Russia, but in the medium to long term, the structural costs of war and sanctions imposed on Russia will have an important and great significance for Russia. Decoupling from Western high technology, falling back to an old dependence on exports of fossil fuels, or maybe because of the, progressing brain drain, which also leads, and of course, the unfavorable demography. Russia will be a weaker power, and the weakness of a power might become a problem for the world order. So a revisionist Russia is definitely a dangerous country. The situation after 45, the situation was to be, made stable. It was, and this is what the United States did. They wanted to have a stable situation, different from Putin's Russia. So I think it is erroneous to say that this is the resumption, the renewal of the Cold War. Well, so we have a kind of, preventing others from expanding too much. As long as we've got Putin's idea around building up military power and economic decoupling, then there is sanctions and, of course, isolating Russia. This is something which happens now. Security at present for Europe means security and safety against Russia, but not with Russia. And this might last for quite some time. So this definitely is a new chapter in international relationships. Let us now talk about the United States. The Russian attack was foreseen by the Americans almost to the day. In the beginning, they said, "We are the leading power of the West." And they also showed that they are a European power. The NATO overnight has gained a new significance, and the EU and the US in a record time came up with an unprecedented, reaction. Lots of sanctions, but to what extent is this joining ranks sufficient? And under President Biden, there will be no normalizing of the situation. This does not mean that the United States, like in Cold War, will use lots of its own forces, taking on security and safety guarantees for Europe. This is a burden which the Europeans have to shoulder themselves, because it is the rival China which has been given top priority by the Americans. So this is the secular axis, you might say, around which the international order will rotate. China in the United States is considered to be the most dangerous partner, so say, and this is the political consensus in Washington. In this area, clearly harmony there, which is unusual. You know, China is not really using a systematic approach. There are all the other way around. There are certain alliances which have been forged against the dominance of China. Then the Quad alliance, United States, India, Japan, and Australia, complemented by the August Pact, Australia, UK, United States. The turn of President Biden when it comes to the Taiwan issues become more fiercer, and sanctions and export bans of strategic goods. This is something which this screw, if you like, has been tightened. And of course, the response of the Chinese, again imposing sanctions, and this means the spiral is turning and turning. Using the most sharpest sword is the threat in the room, i.e., U.S. secondary sanctions against Peking or Beijing if they, avoid or dodge Western sanctions. This elephant, China, is always in the room if representatives of the EU and the United States are meeting. Last example, the Trade and Technology Council, TTC, which was founded last year. The TTC is not aimed at working out a trade agreement, but it is a kind of committee, discussing things between technology and economics, but, with very limited ambitions. From a US perspective, it is a vehicle to, contain China, uh, to set up a genuine transatlantic agreement in geostrategic terms would be very positive and favorable. But for the time being and for the foreseeable future, it is not possible because there is no political will. The United States are still in a protectionist spiral, and free trade is quite unpopular by American. Now this is a slogan which really says a lot, and in Germany, in the EU too, we hear similar slogans, and the requirements to be met by some international agreements, they are getting more stricter and stricter. And this means we have a net oil exporter. These are the Middle East countries, and they are really important. The greatest risk for the international order actually come from the American domestic policy. And this applies to the safety and security of Europe. How reliable are the United States, is the United States as a transatlantic partner? The country is deeply divided. There are divisive cultural fights really poison the public debates. And in November, we are going to have the elections, and this, of course, will show how the Biden administration will fare. And according to any surveys, we can say that the Democrats will probably lose their majority in the Congress. And this means, in terms of in legislative terms, nothing will work out till the next presidential elections. And this applies to the ability of the United States to lead. By 2024, what will happen? Nobody with, say, a serious mind is able to predict. But the return of Donald Trump or a Republican candidate of his, say, ilk is a real possibility. And then things might come true which Europe fears, i.e., the United States withdrawing from the strait. But, at present, thankfully, it hasn't happened yet. Now, China. China, you know, is in a phase, the kind of a peak, the summit, the crest of Xi Jinping's. But I can say that the problems which have aggregated over time are more serious than in the years before. The zero COVID strategy failed. Then the economic growth with is not so good, and the problems, of course, the political problems of the Russian war and the historical influence of the party Congress will not be influenced. It will be a highlight for Xi Jinping. Beijing now officially breaks with the official, say, policy that the tenure of Xi Jinping will be extended for infinity, you might say. In geopolitical terms, China will continue its dominance aspirations in Asia and the Pacific region, and wants to strengthen, by doing so, strengthening its position in the world. Russia's war against Ukraine. Well, this was a kind of acid test for China because the war brought the leadership into a very uncomfortable position. And they didn't manage and were not able to voice even a very, very, very quiet criticism. They said, "We will have a friendship without limits." Now, a few weeks later, this special operation, they found out, has turned into a brutal attack, a war of attack. And the weakness of the Russian military, also a lesson. All this together is a lesson with a view to Taiwan. So China is navigating between two poles. On the one hand, joining ranks with the Russian autocrat. China is not interested in weakening his position. On the other hand, avoiding any Western sanctions which bring about enormous risks for the Chinese economy. Now, what about the future of China in the medium term? China rising to the number one in the world. Is it unstoppable? People mention several structural problems, unfavorable demography, indebtedness, massive infrastructure problems, middle income trap, and declining growth rates. At the same time, impressive technological progresses, which they made 10 years ago. People thought that this will never, ever happen. Then the advantages of a massive data use, and this paired with a state hegemony strategy. And all this helped to do catching up in technological terms, and at the same time uses the geo-circulation strategy in order to become more and more independent of the West. No matter what you think, history always has a very, say, hackneyed or trivial lesson for us. Autocrats, after many years of governing alone, are subject to many problems. There's no control. There are no responsibilities taken on by anyone. Think of Putin, Erdogan, or Xi Jinping, and this is what lies ahead for China in the future. Now about Europe. Europe was shocked by the war against the Ukraine. In political terms, the East-West conflict lines within the EU were exacerbating. The Eastern Europeans really saw their worst fears come true, and the economic damage and loss was clearly evident. And disruptions, turmoil in the societies also was reflected in exploding energy and oil prices. And suddenly the EU faces a very harsh test. But on the other hand, something astonishing happens. The transatlantic alliance showed its best sides. Certain decisions were taken very quickly. The EU, in record times, made available a sanction regime, and at the same time, they also mobilized considerable financial resources to support the Ukraines, and this includes weapon purchases and others. The EU showed that it is able to respond despite U- but the Ukraine war is not yet over. It might be a lasting war. And this kind of situation might become a new normality or normalcy. You see, we can doubt, the end of the European peace order meant that uh, overnight other challenges for Europe became evident. Particularly the dangers for the European security say that America would turn away from Europe after 2024, and then there are the growing antagonisms between the great powers, United States and China. They also pose a problem because there's no other country, there's no other European country is, facing such a high danger or risk like Germany does. And it is obvious if you look at it headwards. Now, the European security and defense policy must get a very, say, tangible thrust. The EU must walk on the path towards making its voice heard. Then we have this voice um, an decisions which have to be taken unanimously. This is something which must be changed. And we've got worldwide trade agreements which have to looked at. The EU, and I believe the United States too, they should work out and strive to achieve a common strategy against China in order to maintain an international standard system. And despite the rivalries between or with China, we should also set up kind of cooperation, say, patterns with China. And this, for instance, refers to the climate protection. Now, the global south. Now, this is the term which people continue or big plan to use. In the past, people said developing countries, and now, after the attack on Ukraine on the 24th of February, suddenly the world seemed to be breaking into two parts: the West and some Asian allies, and versus Russia and China on the other side. But this is something which deceived people because many countries of the South were against this new emerging global bipolarity. India, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, or the Gulf states. Russia being isolated. This, tallies with a Eurocentric view and also wishful thinking. Looking at the various nations and the respective UN vote, there were just a few countries who supported Russia, some of the rogue states. But also, if you look at the African continent, many countries really avoided or evaded voting here against Russia because they depend on Russian supplies, weaponry, energies. And then, the Ukraine war, they consider this to be a regional affair far, far, far away from their sea uh, field of vision. And of course, it was also the ill will, say, against countries of the West because they say they have got this double-headed approach. And many, and in particular Russia, is now trying to get them on board. China, for instance, set up a global initiative, and it is supposed to help these countries against American hegemony and the BRICS, extending the number of these countries. Actually, it took a while until the secondary consequences hit the global south, but then they massively hit these countries because, we have we now have an energy price and food crisis in Africa, in the Middle East, and some parts of the Latin America. Here, I can say the repercussions are really dramatic, and the political stability is at stake in some countries. The international blame game is in full swing. And what about the global south? And now, what is responsible for the situation? It's Putin's war or the Western sanctions. What is to be blamed for it? So, a priori, we should not say that these countries will agree to the Western opinion or will join the ranks of the Western countries. So now, to conclude, what is the new order? Can we see some contours, some first emerging points? We live in a multipolar world. The unipolar moment, the dominance or the domination of the United States, a thing of the past. No power has taken its place so far. The architecture of the multilateralism, the international governance is or has been, say, disrupted because of the Russian war. The UN Security Council, a very important special organization of the United States, and then the G20. They are only able to act to a limited extent. Reforming the respective structures, including the Bretton Woods institutions, are absolutely urgent, but no chance today. Now, in Europe, I can say that we will face confrontations, a phase of confrontations, as long as the Putin system continues to exist. Russia will try to win the fight against the West simply by transferring this war to other countries, Africa, Middle East, Latin America. Russian cyber attacks, hybrid war waging will continue, and the long-term indispensable task to build up an all-European peace order. This is certainly a target and objective which we have in mind. Nevertheless, at present, we can say that this is a thing of the future, a pipe dream maybe. So what happens at present, and this is what will happen over the next decades, I think what dominates the world development is the relationship between the United States and China. Antagonistic elements are there, but cooperative elements exist side by side when it comes to solving problems of the world, health, energy, environment. But we haven't found a place where we could do that. Some important areas will move away from Europe, will move to the Middle East or Asia. In global terms, the ideological competition of systems between democracies and autocracies will get fiercer, and the emerging countries of the global south, well, people or these countries will fight to win them over. In economic terms, there will be two parties. Democracies, for instance, they will say, we will continue on our way to use value-based actions. Free but secure trade is what the Americans call it. What it means, trading with partners on a level playing field. And the European countries seem to move in the same direction. And, the problem is, can we afford following this approach? We are industrial export nations, but nevertheless, this is a trend. It does not mean deglobalization, but it certainly means that there will be a globalization focusing on regions more so than in the past, and there might be different driving forces pushing things or promoting things, and there are other economic factors. So I should say what I would call it a regional globalization. Now, the situation of international relationships, and this might be my kind of concluding hypothesis, is that things are moving, are in flux. A new order not yet to be seen. Maybe we should focus or believe that there will be several systems existing in parallel and a continued, dominance of the United States, I should say, for the next few years. This is still guaranteed. In economical terms, we should focus on multipolarity, and this includes Europe. In technological terms, the competition between the United States and China, and when it comes to climate protection, I should say we are going to have a multipolar and multi-stakeholder order. A multipolar world without a domineering hegemon with parallel orders in various areas. I should say that this is a complex, lucid, easy to see, easy to understand, but less secure, less safe world as we know it. And the last word, it astonishes me when I think about it. The fate of the international order does not only depend on structural, highly efficient factors, but also on individual personalities, leaders, rulers who make a difference, be it Putin, Xi Jinping, Trump, or Biden. In the future, obviously, is not completely, say, predetermined, but it is also influenced by other aspects. So it is still open, and to some extent, this also, bears in itself a kind of hope. Thank you very much for your attention.